Hi, and welcome to another edition of Round Robin. I am not Robin McCormick. I'm Mike Holtzclaw. I'm filling in for Robin today. And we have in studio Yann Le Gouellec, who is the director of Newport News WaterWorks. Now, Newport News WaterWorks is located in Newport News, but it supplies water for the city of Newport News, for Hampton, Poquoson, York County, and parts of James City County. So Yann's work does affect all of us here in Hampton. Yann, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you, Mike. I look forward to it.
And this is, as we are talking here today, this is a very special week. This is National Drinking Water Week.
That's right, Mike. It is something that's important for the whole water utility industry to be talking about, because often we are the silent public servers. No one asks questions until there's a problem. But we think we need to turn this around, especially with the recent advance of social media. People are expecting us to be a little bit more proactive about what we're doing and what they can expect from our water.
Is there anything that people take for granted more than water? You don't think about it. You turn on the tap, the faucet, and water comes out. You get in the shower, water comes out. You brush your teeth, you use water, you flush the toilet. You don't think about where it comes from or how much you're using, but a lot goes into it.
Oh, there is absolutely, Mike. So you're right. Until there's no water and you get no beer or no water or no coffee, or you cannot flush your toilet in the morning, suddenly you realize, well, I need the water. So where's the water coming from? You could start tracing it back, through your pipes, but eventually you realize that it's going to go out towards the street. So you hear about, raw water coming from rivers or from reservoirs. So what's happening in between? This is where we come in. We are providing high-quality drinking water at the right pressure to every home in the peninsula. So it takes a lot of people. It takes about 300 people in our utility to provide water that's constantly doing better than the federal guidelines and regulations to 410,000 people. It works upstream, the source water protection, where we have foresters maintaining the area clean and making sure that we lessen any contamination, because it's a little bit the principle of the ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure. Because eventually we will be treating it, but if we can do upstream work and prevention, then it means less downstream treatment. And then in that treatment, we have actually several levels. I don't know if you want me to go into the...
Absolutely, I'd like to hear it.
So when the water comes in, if you were to just pick a glass of water and pick it up, from, say, the James River, it would look pretty brown. Well, that water is because it has a lot of particles in it. It also probably would be hiding some pathogens, some microbes. That's why when you go camping, you'd rather not try to drink directly, from a river water. Well, we're in the same situation, except that we are receiving this water from 5 reservoirs. And when it arrived at the plant, there's a raw water intake. And the raw water intake is basically a pump that gets into a succession of facilities. The first part that you want to do is actually make all those particles kind of stick together. And that's called coagulation. So we're adding a chemical to make all those particles stick together so they can actually settle more easily. Then, when you're getting rid of the larger particles, you still have a lot of small little particles. So we go through filtration. Filtration is through a bed of sand, if you will, and the water will go through, and then all the particles will get either trapped or intercepted by the sand. Then it goes through the sand, and then after that, you may still have other issues. So what we're doing is that we're applying ozone, and ozone has 2 things. It can do some disinfection. It also can oxidize. So if you had dissolved chemicals that were in the raw water that could not be removed during the coagulation, sedimentation, and filtration, then we have ozonation. And then finally, to ensure that your water that you're receiving at the tap travels in the distribution system with the right amount of disinfectant, we call it a disinfectant residual, we are applying chlorine and ammonia, so chloramine, to make sure that you have safe drinking water at your tap.
It's an amazing process, and it's, as you're just pointing out, there are so many more layers than we know. Again, we just assume that water is going to come out when we turn on the faucet. The first thing that you mentioned is forestry. And I would guess that most of the people who are listening to this would hear that word and say, well, what in the world does a forest have to do with my drinking water? But that's at the beginning of the process, right?
That's right. This is really our first treatment, if you will. It's a pre-treatment. A healthy forest means a healthy water for us. So we actually are having a group of foresters and people who basically maintain what we own, the watershed and the forest that's around the watershed, as clean as possible. So it means having environmental protections and buffers that are also stemming from the Chesapeake Bay Act. And all this helps us to really get already a relatively clean water going into our reservoirs. But then from the reservoirs, we still need to go and treat it.
Now, you mentioned the number 410,000 customers. And I keep talking about what we take for granted. How much water does an average person use, drinking, bathing, using the toilet, everything else? How much water does an average Hampton resident use in the course of a day?
That's a very interesting question, because actually the answer has evolved over time. You would have asked me that question about 20 years ago. The general rule of thumb was about 100 gallons per person per day. Nowadays, because we have low-flow toilets, the shower heads also are limiting kind of the water usage, I would say it's probably going to be closer to 60 gallons per person per day.
And it's a great bargain. It's about I believe it's about $1.30 per day.
That's right. So it's if you want to make a comparison, is that essentially you could get for the same cost of getting a half liter of a plastic water bottle, 1,500 glasses in your home. And not only that, but the plastic water bottle is regulated under the FDA. We are regulated under the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agencies. And actually the rules are more stringent for drinking water than they are for bottled water.
Now, you just talked about how much the consumption has changed over the last 10 or 20 years. And that's very important. We're getting better about how we use water. And I'm guessing it's not just low-flow fixtures, but also people learning when you are going to brush your teeth. The water doesn't need to be running the whole time, that kind of thing, saving. How important has that been for the waterworks, for the ecology, everything else, just that understanding of conserving water?
Absolutely. Conserving water is very important, and we have a lot of effort that we're putting into this, because we want to make sure that the water that you have now is also going to be available for your children and your grandchildren. And so we want to make sure that this whole surface water that are coming from our reservoir is available for future generations. What we have found is that a leak, when you hear your toilet leaking and you're thinking, well, it's just a little leak, well, it adds up. Because even if it was, say, a gallon a minute, then this is 24/7. After a month, you'd be probably spending or consuming, even though you're not actually directly consuming it, close to 50,000 gallons. This is a huge amount of water. So being aware of all those potential leaks is very important. And that's because we have a lot of customers. Now, the other thing is also, in the past, we had probably more industries that were more consuming water. And because of the need to recycle water, because they would have had costs, if they send the water directly at a one-time pass into the sewers, now they are actually recycling the water. So we saw our water demand since the basically early 2000 to now slightly declining.
What has been, now that has to do with the consumer and how we use water. What have been the biggest changes in the last couple of decades on your end, on the industrial end, of how the water is processed better?
So what we have is, since the 1980s, you've had the surface water treatment rule that was enacted by the EPA and Congress and all. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that the water is getting better and better. So in, say, maybe maybe 100 years ago, you would have had just the sand, maybe the clarification and the simulation and the sand. But as techniques have evolved, say over the last 20 years, we would have been able to actually add ozone, because now we're realizing that there are some chemicals that are going into the water that even if you have healthy forests, may not be able to prevent it. So we've been adding treatment processes, and it's layering. And so we call it the multi-barrier approach, because it's not just one layer. You would have basically like a Swiss cheese. If you had several slices, well, it can go maybe from the first hole, but not necessarily the second or the third hole.
The one more thing I wanted to ask you about, we're talking about what has changed in the last 10 or 20 years. Based on what you know is being worked on right now and developed right now, what do you think will be the most significant change or evolution in the next 10 or 20 years about how water is processed and maybe about how it's consumed?
That's actually a question that will take many answers. We do have ongoing regulations right now, whether they are the lead and copper rule or PFAS, which are also named the forever chemicals. But sometimes some of the bigger challenges for us is the retirement of people. It takes a lot of expertise, as you heard, to treat the water. It takes a lot of expertise to repair mains, and also the same thing for forestry. It's basically an entire business that we have up to 50% of our workforce that are eligible to retire in the next few years. This is a huge turnover. The second thing is that infrastructure that we have had in place for more than 100 years, actually, I believe that it's next year that we will be celebrating our 135th anniversary since we started. All that infrastructure needs continual replacement. To be able to replace that infrastructure because of leaks, because of, sometimes you have tubercles, some corrosion that's happening into it, that takes money. And so we want to be able to maintain the same great infrastructure for the future generations, so we need to have also the money to be able to reinvest in that aging infrastructure. So people, money, the assets that go with it, and all that knowledge. And that's where we see that challenge, because how do you prioritize between regulations that are coming, but also the necessity to make sure that everyone gets the right amount of water when they need it?
So you talk about retirement and turnover. Do we have a new generation of college students who are coming out looking to get into this field? And what are they studying right now? If a college student wanted to get into the future of water processing, are we talking about engineering students or biology students? And are they coming? Or do we see the next generation of workers?
Kind of all of the above. So what is wonderful about the water utility industry is that you have different levels that you can enter. You can enter, straight from trade school. You can enter with a college or with a high school degree. And a lot of it will happen is, as long as you have the skills and the right attitude, we can do the training. So training will take, a month, if not years, to really be perfected. And one of the things why I was very glad that you invited us for Drinking Water Week is because a lot of people don't know about this. Even when we go to civil and environmental engineering departments in the local universities, they may go for structural engineers, they may go for different jobs. But the idea of joining a water utility is not the first thing that crossed their mind. So there's an effort here for us on the education part to let them know this is a great industry to work in. There are many jobs and many careers that are really helping the public directly.
Well, Yann, thank you so much for coming in today for National Drinking Water Week. And we're very happy to have you here at Round Robin. And thank you for watching.